Okay, thanks for joining us today. Rob, can you tell us what is your full name and when and where you were born?
Or Crackers, shall I call you? It's my privilege to be interviewed by you and Leanne. And just to give you a little background on my upbringings in Mulwala. I was born to Jack and Ruth Purtle in Mulwala some nearly 76 years ago. And I've lived in Mulwala all my life, apart from probably 2 to 3 months after we got married. We moved to Yarrawonga, but I didn't like Yarrawonga, so I wanted to come back to Mulwala, so I did.
Do you have any other siblings?
I had a brother, Barry, who was 18 months older than what I was. He was a little bit of a renegade, and he died at a very young age. He was only 42 when he died, but as I said, he was a bit of a renegade. He left Mulwala and went and joined the police force, and I think that was the undoing of him.
Whereabouts did you live in Mulwala?
As I said, my parents had the corner shop at 64 Melbourne Street, Mulwala now, diagonally opposite the school and directly opposite the post office. That was the school that I went to and was educated until year 10, until I found an apprenticeship with a fellow by the name of Graham Burley. But in my upbringings at Mulwala Central School, I met a hell of a lot of friends that are still friends of today. And just looking back in some of the teachers that were there, it was a bit of a history on its own. I remember the first headmaster was Frank and Mary Walker. They weren't very, very nice people. They had so many rules and regulations, and they weren't too popular. Another one, and I've got to mention her, was my first teacher, and her name was Jan Hawke. Jan Hawke today is Jan Corboy, and I still love her today. She taught me a lot when I was at school. It was interesting, some of the teachers. Bert Washington, he was a great little bloke, Bert Washington. Never ever called him Bert, it was always Mr. Washington. And then there was a fellow by the name of Tim Cattell, if I remember correctly. He lived around in Hume Street in the schoolhouse, and he was deputy headmaster at one stage. And just thinking this morning before you come along, there was a fellow by the name of O'Neill. He was a different kettle of fish, he was. He was just one of those fellows that used to pick his toenails up and out in class and flick his toenails into everyone. As I said, he was very, very different, Tim.
What was it like as a teenager in Mulwala?
It was great. It really was, because you found your own entertainment. There was no Facebooks or mobile phones or anything like that back in those days. You had to find your own entertainment. And that swimming pool, which was directly behind our shop, we used to congregate there every night in the middle of summer, every night. And then in the wintertime, it was mainly down at the football oval, playing football, messing around. But back in those days, they never had a thirds or fourths or reserves. No, they didn't have reserves, I don't think. We used to find our own games. And at school, I know that we used to come along and, the teachers used to organise some inter-school competitions with mainly Oaklands, Wulbundry, Howlong, I don't think we went to Coral and played. We did have a couple of games over in Yarrawonga, I remember, but that was very rare going over there. But no, as I said, we found our own entertainment and everyone just got along together, and it was great, it really was.
You said when you left school you started an apprenticeship. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of your working life, Rob? Did you ever at some point move away from Mull?
Well, I was blessed a little bit because I used to do a bit of work with Bill McBurney, a bit of hay carting work when I was 15, 16. And he said to me then, he said, what are you going to do with yourself? I said, I don't know. I've put in for an apprenticeship at the explosive factory, but seeing my parents never worked there, it was always sort of given to the siblings of people that work there, and that's fair enough too. That's looking after your own. And he said about Graham Burley. Now he's looking for an electrician apprentice. So I was just fortunate that one of the young blokes that were working with him at the time, he got an apprenticeship at the factory and give away the electrical. So I rang Graham up, and he used to call me Bob. And I rang him up and I said, Graham, I'm wondering whether you're going to put an apprentice on. He said, I'll pick you up in the morning at 8 o'clock. And I was living at home with Mum and Dad. And 8 o'clock come and I'm sitting out the front waiting for him with my lunch and everything cut. And we were going to do a job. About 10:30 he arrived. And I think that's where probably a little bit rubbed off onto me with my times and that, not being too prompt with my times. But and then I done my apprenticeship with Graham, and I really do appreciate it. And at the end of my apprenticeship, I was sort of engaged to Helen then, and then he got me. He said, "Yeah, Helen, you and Helen come over for tea. Once there's something to talk about." And I thought, Helen, this is it. I'm getting a flick, so I don't know where to go after that. And he said, I'm going to Queensland. And he said, I owe you a few dollars. He said, what about you take over the business? And I'm 21 years of age. And he said, here, you take the business over. And so that's how Helen and I come into the electrical business. Now my boys are here, taking over from where I was. So we've been going 50 odd years.
Growing up in Mulwala, was there any events or festivals or things like that that stood out?
Probably a little bit later on in life, as the major one was the Rock Isle. That was a sensational thing, and the unfortunate thing was the Willie Nelson concert that never come. But Mulwala did have the Rock Isle, which really sort of put us on the map a little bit in that way of thing. But there was always entertainment around Mulwala. I do remember the closing of the hall. What a night that was. With your parents were there too, Crackers, and Leanne's, and that was it was a highlight of unfortunately the closing of the old hall in Mulwala and building of the new one. But that was under Coral Shire's time, and it was a big thing. But as far as anything else, there's always something happening in Mulwala.
Were you or are you involved in any groups within Mulwala?
I'm chairman of the Progress Association at the moment. I have been for a long, long time. And it's a very, very active group. but might only be small in the way of numbers on the committee. But I'm very proud of the Mulwala Progress Association. We have acquired the land where Tons of Fun is today and the op shop, and we own that, or it's just about owned it outright now. It was funny how we come across that. We were trying for a lease on it. There was Doug Evans and myself. We were trying to get a lease on it, and we got talking to a chap in the lands department in Griffiths, and he come down and he said to us, I will sign this over to you if not much is said about it in the next 3 or 4 months. And he said, I'll sign it over to the Mulwala Progress Association, because Doug wanted the Rotary Club, but I know where the money would have went. It would have went to Melbourne and so on. It wouldn't have been put back into the town. So the Progress Association took that over, and then he come down and we signed all the particulars over, and he said, well, that's my last doing. He said, I'm finishing up today at the Lands Department, and this is what I've always wanted to do, is to give back to the community what the community should have. And that, the Progress Association, the building of the St Andrew's Church in Mulwala, and the 4 little units that are next to it, that was another, well, it wasn't my idea, but the Reverend that was here at the time, he came up with the suggestion of the units, and we got a little committee together, and I think your parents were the first ones to buy a unit there, Alan, and yeah, and we built the church, which was great. Goes back a few years now, and yeah, but I think the main thing that I can see in my life was when Purtle Park was named after my father. He put a lot into Mulwala, and now his name has been rewarded, and I feel very, very proud.
Growing up in Mull, as a younger chap, who were the shopkeepers in town?
Old Tom Savage, for sure. Tom, he was a true gentleman, Tom. And then there was, well, my parents had the corner store down the other opposite the post office. And then there was Jim Everett. When I first remember, Jim Everett had the baker shop there. And then Max and Melvin McKee bought Jim Everett out, and they had the baker shop, which is today's fishing shop. Then there was Kay's down the corner where I see there's a new chicken shop going there now. And then further down there was S.D. Bowles. He had it was just the north of the Royal Mail Hotel. He had a store there. His was a process store. He had a lot there, and he was a true gentleman, old Jim. Can't remember too many other stores around the place. There probably was.
Can you remember who the publicans were when you were turned 18?
Well, I remember when going into one pub, and a friend of mine, and we were only about 17, and he asked us for our licence and that, and then he said, no, I can't serve you, and that was the Royal Mail Hotel, and Arthur Evans, I think, had the pub then, but he had a fellow by the name of, he used to have the veggie garden down where the motel is today, Mulwala Resort is today, and I thought to myself, if he's kicked us out, being underage, and he'd be the biggest alcoholic that ever walked, and I thought, no, if that's the case, don't do it again. Then there was Joe O'Brien, of course. He had the swinger. And God, who was before him? But a friend of mine, his parents used to have the Royal Mail, and that was Noel Jarvis. And Noel Jarvis, young Noel Jarvis and I are still mates today. He lives in Western Australia. But his father was, he played with Fitzroy, number 27 for Fitzroy. And I think that's why I sort of supported Fitzroy. And he went on to a little bit of history. He went on and played a grand final in the reserves and seniors and won them both in the same year. And that was back in 1938 or 39 at the start of the war or in the wartime.
Did you have anything to do with the local fire brigade?
The old fire brigade, the bush fire brigade, I didn't. No, I was too young then. But I remember them around the corner there in opposite the school, behind Mrs. Casey's place. Yeah, I do remember that. And Bob Beams and I think your father was in there too, once again. And there was Abby Breer was there, Yocka Moore, some identities in Mulwala. They were true identities, those people. Yeah, I do recall them. But I did join the fire brigade when it got moved around the corner to Melbourne Street with Bob Rooker and Alan Lillywhite was his name, I think, and Vinnie Slattery, Dennis Orr, Dennis's brother, Johnny, myself. Yeah, I can just sort of picture those. Mark Moore, he was in it. Yeah, that was the foundation of the fire brigade, I don't know what they call it, the New South Wales Fire Brigade, not the Rural Fire Brigade. Yeah.
The football club has been a constant in Mulwala. What's your association with the footy club, and can you give us a rundown on your football career?
Well, my football career there, I was very fortunate. As I said before, I used to go down there in the wintertime and train and play. And Bob Donovan was an instigator of a lot of reserves games and kids games for us. And I played my first senior game at 14 with Mulwala against Wilby, and I've never been so scared in all my life coming up against Wilby. And Rusty Winrow was the fellow. I was 19th man, and Bob was injured, and he didn't want to come off because you couldn't put him back on then. And anyway, he ended up coming off in the last quarter, and I got on, and was the opposition was Rusty Winrow. And yeah, I think it was only 1 or 2 games I had that year, but sitting on the bench. But getting to Bob Beams, he was probably the hardest man I've seen play football, and probably one of the most hated men that played Tungamar League football. But he was strong and willpower. But when I went to Yarrawonga in '66, he was the first one to shake my hand and wish me all the best. And I've never forgotten that meeting that Bob and I had, because we used to ride to work together in the mornings, because he worked at McCulloch's in Yarrawonga, and I'd get to the bridge and turn off, and he'd go to his McCulloch's, and yeah. And Bob being my neighbour, he wasn't as tough as it wasn't as hard on me as what he was on his boys and a lot of other people.
How many games did you play at Yarra?
Close on 200 games at Yarra. I'm a life member over there, and I played probably nearly 100 with Mull, I think. Back in those days, you only played probably 12, 15 games a year. But when I left Yarra, I come back to Mulwala and under Frank Seymour and Frank and Bob were pretty good mates, and I was talking to Betty the other day, Betty Seymour, and she still gets out in that garden and does her plants and everything. And when I go to Queensland, I always make a point to run into Stake, and it's great. You meet a lot of friendship in sport. I was only thinking this morning about some of the sporting things we used to do. Well, in the summertime it was either cricket or tennis, and I played with the publics in Mulwala, and there was St Andrews down there, and it was funny how the northern end, like the Murrays and that Corboys and all them, Nicholsons, they played for the St Andrews, and I was down the other end. I played down the other end with Elmer Mitchell and Junie Ritchie. Junie Ritchie's would be one of the hardest women I've ever seen hit a ball. I used to play a lot with June in the mixed competition, and I still recall whenever she was serving, I was keep an eye on her, because if she hit you, you certainly had a bruise at the end of the day. But she was a lovely girl. That's Jack Ritchie's mother, and she was a Jackson, I think, Junie Jackson. But her father had a blacksmith place in back in Mulwala, and
Do you recall any prominent or historical events that have happened in Mulwala?
Well, I know the biggest one was the pop festival. I can't recall off the top of my head, but Mull is a place that's got a lot of history to it, and you don't realise until you go down to that museum and have a look. I'm involved with the bridge, trying to get a new bridge, but it's 100 years old this year, the old bridge, and we still haven't given up hope of getting the King here to opening it, but time is starting to run out, and his health is not running too good either. But the history itself on the bridge is everyone talks about the bow in the bridge and the dip in the bridge. Well, after my fairly detailed inquiries into why, and you only have to go to the Sloanes and they'll tell you how it was built, that when the bridge started in Mulwala on the New South Wales side of what we call Miss Ross Hill, where the girders are, it was heading towards Kogel Street. Kogel Street being the street where it was going to end up at. But halfway through, or once the girders were built, the people in Belmore Street kicked up about it all, made a hell of a noise about it. They wanted it down the main street. So they diverted it from Kogel Street to Belmore Street. And that is why, with the dip and the turn in the bridge, and that's what I'm led to believe, that the reason why the bridge is what it is, a unique bridge from what it is today. But prior to that bridge, we used to have barges going to and from Belmore Street to what we call Jimmy Orr's house. That's another history on its own, the sawmill in Mulwala. You know, it used to employ so many good people, and and one of those, I do recall being a young fella and making tunnels in the sawmill the sawdust at the sawmill. And you think today, what would have happened if it had collapsed, all these tunnels that we had and used to go through? I knew our parents didn't know anything about that.
The town has certainly grown since you were a young fella. What are your thoughts on its growth, and what does Mull need for its future?
Well, that's a good question. Mulwala is growing because, as I've said all the way along, it's God's own country, right here. And with the growth of the factory and what we believe may be coming from there, I think our biggest problems are our services as far as water and sewer go. Perhaps, once again, I'll bring my father's name in, and Leanne's father realises this and knows this too, that when we got the sewerage on, he wanted to build a sewerage farm out towards Savernake, saying that you've got to cater for the future, not just today. But no, the Shire in their midst belief that they'll put the sewage down where it is. Now, it's not big enough. The sewage treatment plant, the water treatment plant, well, that was only built for the factory, and we got on the back of that, and we still have the best water out, even though it is fluoride. But as far as the future, the land that is coming available, if Federation Shire today can support Mulwala all the way through with their services and sewerage and water, without sort of putting too much pressure on the developers. Like, it's fair enough, get the developers to put in so much, but not the lot, because it's their revenue to come later on. Once the sewage is in, there shouldn't be too much other cost, and the Shire are going to reap all the benefits. As we know with this development at the end of North Street there, it should be, we should be, or the Shire should be rubbing their hands together, pushing and helping as much as they can, rather than be a hindrance and make all the obstacles out, because it'll just turn developers off the place. And as we said, we know what the factory's going to do, and if there's going to be another 200 or 300 more jobs there, they've got to have somewhere to live. So if I had a crystal ball, I'd be right, but that's only my belief anyway.
Well, thank you for your time, Possum. It's been fantastic to sit down and talk to you today.
Look, Crackers, you know as well as what I do, I love the place. And Mulwala, being Mulwala, and we're both Mulwala people, the three of us are Mulwala people, you know, we've got to strive for the better of our kids and grandkids and nephews and that, because it is, without a doubt, one of the best places you'd ever want to come and see.
Thank you.